Hi, and welcome everyone to this session about DevOps for ABAP and how the Git-enabled CTS could help you with setting that up in your system. In the session, you will get some ideas what GCTS is. We'll see some news, what is new in your new release, and so on. And I will give you a short demo how all of this works. So the basics. What is GCTS? So you might have heard of Git. It is a version control system where you can store your files. Up to now, you might use it for other development languages, like, for example, Java. The idea is now that with GCTS, you can also use Git to store your ABAP sources. So the systems that you might have in place for ABAP, the development system, test, and production as the classical example, they stay the same. So you will still use your development system for developing your stuff. You will have a test system, production system, or also other systems in this as you might need them. But when you store something, so when you save your development and release a transport request, then things change if you used the GCTS. You would then save the objects to Git. There's still a transport request involved. We will see more details on this later, but the transport request will not go to the import queue of any target system anymore, but you will find a commit in Git, and you can use this commit to provide any other system with the changes that you developed. So we still have the classical CTS somehow in place in the background. We have it combined with Git, and this is why it's named the Git-enabled CTS. And you can use what you stored on Git to provide the content that you have in there, to provide the objects that you have in there to any other system. So you can choose a commit and make the content of this commit the active one in your ABAP system. So how does all of this work? On this, I would like to show you a short process slide. So how does this work? The developer continues starting where he's used to. So he uses ABAP development tools, for example, or he uses SE80, or he uses SPro if it's about customizing, and he uses SE09 to work with the transport requests. So he creates first a transport request as he does today, or he gets one that has been pre-created for him. And then he tracks his changes. It can be coding, and that's new in the newest release. He can also use customizing or customizing transport requests and track the changes in these transport requests. After he finished his development, he can release the transport request. So up to now, you can see no difference in how developers work. But what you can do now when you release the transport request is you can push stuff to a repository on the Git side. If this happens, depends in case of customizing on the transport target that you chose. In case of coding, it depends on the transport layer that you chose. If the transport layer is one that is made for working with Git, then you will push the objects that are inside this transport request to Git in a repository that has been defined before. What you can do now is you can add a CI server into this process. So you can use, for example, Jenkins to set up some pipelines. These pipelines could then take care of your new development. So when something leaves the development system, you could use a pipeline to deploy it to a target system, to a test system. And in there, you could automatically execute some tests. After you executed the tests, you can get feedback. The developer can get details whether everything was okay or not. And depending on the result, you can either repeat the process until to the point that we have seen it up to now, or you can then decide everything is good, it needs to go to production. And this is where continuous deployment comes into the game. So you could use Git methods to merge the changes that you did into, let's say, a release branch. And if you do so, you could have another pipeline that looks onto this release branch and makes automatically available these new development on your production system, for example, and deploys it to the ABAP runtime so that your business users can make use of it. So this is how the software lifecycle process could look like if you use GCTS. For sure, this is not a must. You can combine this software lifecycle process with the ones that you are executing right now with the classical CTS in one system. So as I said, if you use GCTS or not depends on the transport layer or on the transport target. So you can have different packages with different transport layers, And one of them can make use of GCTS, and the other one uses the classical way of transporting via CTS as you might use it as of today. So what do you need to be able to use all of this? First, you need two things on the must side. So you need the Git platform. It can be GitHub, it can also be others. And you need for sure the ABAP systems. The three systems that are shown in here, dev, test, prod, are just an example. So you can have a 2-system landscape, you can have a 5-system landscape, it doesn't matter. It's just an example. And on the optional side, you can use a CI server that allows you to use pipelines to automate this process. What do you need to install on these systems? For the Git platform, we don't have any special requirements. So you can use GitHub, you can use GitLab, CodeBucket. There are some restrictions in the new release that might apply to some of these providers. GitHub is supporting everything that we have in our documentation. On the ABAP systems, you need SAP S/4HANA 1909 at least. So below that, we do not provide any GCTS functionality. If you would like to use customizing or make use of customizing transports within GCTS, you need the 2020 release. In addition, you need a Java machine. So the SAP machine version 11 is an option, or you can use any other comparable JRE, which is on Java 1.8 at least. In addition, we have some notes published. You will find them at the end of this presentation that you need to install on each of these systems. On the CI server, we don't have anything special that you need to install. So especially we don't have any plugins for Jenkins or whatever that you have to install. But we try to help you as good as we can for setting up the pipelines. So if you look into Project Piper, there you can find some pipeline steps that are made for GCTS especially. So you can make use of them to set up your pipeline. And what do you need to configure? On the Git side, you need for sure a repository. If it's a new one, and that's most probably the case, if you start with GCTS and never pushed ABAP stuff to your Git, then you would need an initial commit in this. On the ABAP side, you have to configure Fiori. So for GCTS, we provide an SAP Fiori application that is used to do the configuration, that is also used to work on repositories and so on. So you would need to configure Fiori, and then you would need to enable this GCTS Fiori app. We have some additional authorizations. So GCTS comes with a new role that you should copy and add to your users. We have some parameters that need to be configured, and we have to initialize the system, which means that there is a background job scheduled that makes sure that GCTS can get the content of the transport requests, for example. After you did all of this initial configuration, you can then clone the repository. So this means that the connection between Git and ABAP is established. We do then have a local repository on the ABAP side and the remote repository on the Git side. When we think about Git in classical or in other development environments, it's more the case that your local laptop somehow is your development environment. This is where to you clone your repository. This is where you have your whole development environment. When you think about GCTS, it's a bit different. Then the ABAP server is somehow the local development environment. So you don't have the whole development environment, the whole ABAP runtime or whatever on your local laptop. You use still the ABAP server where you develop stuff, where the transport requests are created and so on. And therefore, the repository has to be cloned to this ABAP server and not to your local laptop. So that's a big difference if you think about how you might work with Git in other development languages. After that, you can create branches. So if you like to work with different branches, like we've seen it on the slide before, like with a branch for development and another one for releasing stuff, then you can create them. On the CI server side, you can then define the pipeline and make your process as much automated as you like as possible. Okay, so now let's take a look into what is new. Some of the stuff that you're going to see is new in S/4HANA 2020, and some of the stuff that you will see is already available. So one thing that is very important and maybe hopefully helpful for you is the health check. So that's an option to find out how your system is doing. There are many checks done about user permissions, about configuration, connection checks, and all of this stuff. So the health check is part of the SAP Fiori app for GCTS. You can filter in this. You can find out what are the most severe. So as you can see on the top of the screenshot, we have 3 categories: for severe, for warnings, and for checks that are okay. So you can filter. And then that hopefully helps you. You can click on the arrows that are behind or on each line, and then you can get more details, what has to be done or what is the error about. This functionality is by default available in SAP S/4HANA 2020, but if you would like to use it on 1909, you can also do so. We provided a central note for that you can see linked on this slide. And in this note, you will find all the details, what you need to do to enable this health check. Another thing that we recently offer is the health wizard to support you with the initial setup. So this wizard guides you through the most important or all the steps that are necessary on each and every system. So you will have to tell the wizard, the system by this, where is your GCTS working directory? So where to shall the repositories be cloned? What is the Java client? Where is it? And some additional stuff. And in the end of the wizard, you will also find the option to schedule this observer job that is needed for the communication. At the end of this wizard, you will also be automatically redirected to the health check. So this shows you whether your configuration that you just did was successful and all is working and so on. For this, the same applies as for the health check. So the wizard is available by default with S/4HANA 2020. And if you like to use it on S/4HANA 1909, then you would need some additional notes. And again, you can find all the details in our central note, where we try to collect all what is new and all the bug fixes that we have and so on. So if you work with GCTS, this note number is really something good to remember. Now let's talk about the real new functionality that's only available in S/4HANA 2020, and that's customizing. So up to now, before 2020, you were only able to use GCTS to manage all the content, all the objects that you developed that were stored in Workbench transport requests. Now you can also use customizing transport requests. And the procedure is that when you create a transport request, you define the target. So when you define a customizing transport request, you always have to define the target where it shall go to. When you configured GCTS, the repositories, you were asked to define a virtual SID. So this is a non-ABAP system from a TMS perspective. And this virtual SID is now what you need to enter as a target in this customizing transport request. If you use this request or this target for a request, you would then see the results or the objects when you release the transport request in the repository on the Git side. Technically speaking, what we can support as customizing in 2020 is TDAT and VDAT. So if you're looking for CDAT, then you would have to wait for another while, because what we have initially now are these 2 types. In addition, what's now possible is to transport the deletion of taboo entries. So that was also not possible in the past. You could transport taboo entries, new ones or changes, but you could not delete them. And that's now also changed. What has also changed is the format of the repositories. So in SAP S/4HANA 2020, new repositories that you create will be in JSON format. That's a parameter of the repository. You will find it in the details if you look into the GCTS app. And this is not for all of the old repositories. So if you had been working with GCTS in 1909, nothing will be changed. So you can continue working with these repositories as you did. And you also cannot change or should not change the format, because this will not work for data that is already available on Git. But for new repositories, it would be good to use this new format. By default, it will be set to this new format when you create a new repository. And the idea of this is that the content that is stored on Git is now a bit better readable. There's still a lot of information and so on, but you don't have these XML files anymore if you already looked into the details, which need a lot of space, which provide a lot of tags around it that you might not necessarily need. So now you can view them in a JSON format. What is also quite new is the Project Piper steps that we recently provided. This is not restricted to S4HANA 2020. You can use these pipeline steps also in S4HANA 1909. So we have, in a sum, provided 5 different pipeline steps. You can create repositories and clone repositories. This is more for the setup. And we have 3 additional steps: deploy a commit, run a unit test, and roll back a commit that you can use during your working mode, so for your DevOps processes. The pipeline can set up in the way as you can see it on the slide. So the first step would be to deploy a new commit to a new or another system. Then, if your ABAP coding comes with unit tests, then you could ask Piper or the pipeline to execute these unit tests. And depending on the result, you can decide what shall happen. So if the unit test is okay, you would for sure normally not do anything else because your system is fine, the new coding is there. But if the unit test fails, then you could do a rollback. The idea behind this is that the test system where you most probably deployed the new commit to is always in an up and running state. So this means all other developers can always deploy their stuff to this system and test it. The developer who provided the commit with the error can make sure or can fix his error with the time he needs and then try again to deploy his stuff. This rollback is only intended for this use case. So it's not made for rolling back a production system, for example, to a coding state that is several weeks old, because we really roll back everything to the state of the commit that you chose for the rollback. We do not save any data. So if you used the coding already in the target system, created new stuff, maybe, for example, you changed the database table and the table became bigger, so more, I don't know, characters allowed or whatever, and you roll that back, then the table will be rolled back to the old state and the data that you created based on the new coding will be lost. So we don't do any saving of the data that had been created based on the new coding. That's what you really should know. So this rollback is not a real rollback in case the system has all the data still or whatever you might expect. It's really made for the case that a deployment was not successful, that the unit test failed, and that you would like to keep the system up and running, but no one really worked up to now with these new features that you might have provided. What happens in the background when you deploy a commit is that a transport request is created, and this transport request takes into consideration the current state of your system, so the latest commit that is active on the system, and what is new in the commit that you decided to deploy. And all of the differences will be put into one transport request. So you don't need to import all commits when we talk, for example, about production systems, but only the latest. And then automatically all the differences will be checked and what is needed to be deployed will be deployed. Okay, so I hope that this gave you a short introduction on how GCTS works. And with this, I would now like to show you a demo that gives you some more details how working with customizing feels like. We have a new Fiori app, as I already mentioned, which is called Git Enabled CTS. You can add that tile to your home screen. When you click on it, you will see what has already been configured. If it's the first time that you start this application, you won't see any repository in here. So if this is the case, then your first step would be to use this Enable GCTS button. This will bring up a wizard where you can then configure the most important things, the working directory, the Java runtime, and some additional stuff. After you did so, you can also use the health check to find out whether your system is working fine. What you will see in there are the configurations that are okay, the configurations that are on error, and the configurations that might be wrong. After you did this initial configuration, you can then switch and turn on some repositories or configure some repositories. For this, you first need to have a repository on your GitHub, on your server, for example. So we have one which is called Demo 2020. This needs to be configured. So you can add new repositories to the list of your repositories that are available, and then you can configure where they are located, the passcode, and stuff like this. After this is done, you can click. This will bring you to the details. There you can see all the commits that are currently available. There might be several branches, so you can choose from them and check the commits that are available. You can also check the configuration of your repository. So there might be additional parameters. We now here just have a basic set of parameters. You can check the activities, what had happened to your repository. So here you can find out when a certain commit had been created, what was the previous commit, and stuff like this. On the Objects tab, you can see the objects that are available. So I already did some stuff in before so that you can see something in here. If you had some items that have to be tracked, you would also be able to see this in here. There's another tab for the branches. In here you can see that for our repository, we currently just have one branch, the master branch. You can create new branches, and then you can decide which shall be the active one. If you switch to another branch, then the most current commit of the respective branch will be deployed to your ABAP system, and that commit would be the active version of your objects in the ABAP runtime system. There's also a log where you can find out what had happened. You can see if everything was okay with the latest activities or if something went wrong. So having that said, we will now go through a little demo. We have two systems for this demo. We have N20, which is our development system, and we have T20, which is our target system. And what we're going to do is we are doing a little customizing. So let's say here on N20, we check the postal codes that are available. So what kind of codes do we already have? Let's take a look. So there are already many countries, and what you define in here is how the postal code looks like, if it consists of numbers, if it consists of letters, and stuff like this. So this is what we currently have on N20. Let's say we need a new country named TAGET. So let's say it has the abbreviation TE. It's not yet in the list in here. So let's check our target system. Here, this is T20, and go for the same customizing stuff. So in here, we can also see that there's currently no country TE available. So let's get back to our development system, N20, and create a new entry. So we say that's country TAGET, and it has a postal code which consists of 4 numbers. So let's save our entry. What we need now is a new customizing transport request. So all of this is like you would work if GCTS was not available. So let's name it, say we created country TE, and the target system, this is something that had been defined during the configuration of GCTS, is named T2X. So that's somehow the target system if you would like to push stuff that you created to Git. In our case, that's sure something that you can configure. It can happen that you have more than one of these in your system, but for our case, it's now named T2X. Okay, so that's our new transport request. Let's save it. And that's the transport request that we would like to use. Okay, so the new entry is now in here, and we can go and release our transport request. So for this, we are going to use SS09, also most probably known, a good known standard transaction. And we need to release a customizing transport request, so let's restrict the selection to this. Okay, so this is the transport request that we just created with one customizing task in it. So here you can see what we did. So now we have to release the task and we have to release the transport request. So nothing special, all standard behavior if you work on customizing. Okay, so now it had been exported. So let's check what had happened on GitHub, or let's check it in our Git Fiori UI. So here we are on N20 again. Let's refresh the stuff. And now you can see a new commit is shown named TE. And also in here you can see as virtual SID the target system that we just used. So this is where you can see what you have to use if you create a new transport request in the customizing or in SE09, or if you also work with customizing objects. Okay, so here we do have the new transport as a commit. We can see it's the active one. So this is indicated by two factors. One is you cannot activate it, and the other is it's written in bold letters. It can also be that any of the other commits is the active one. So you can choose to go for one of the other commits by just clicking on this. And then the changes or the version of the objects as it's available in the respective commit will be activated on your system. Okay, so now we are on the development system, but let's go to our target system and see what this means on the target system. So in here, we did not click any refresh up to now. So this is the state of the repository that we had before we created our transport request. So let's refresh in here as well. And what you can see, the commit that we had before is still the active one. The new commit is shown, but it's not yet active. There are options to automate this. So with GCTS, as you've seen before, we provide some pipeline steps that you can use to set up a pipeline for Jenkins, for example. If you had done so, it would be possible to automate this import in the target system, in the test system. It's not done in here, as this demo is made to show you the real basics of GCTS without using any other tools around it. So this means, in our case, we have to activate that manually. So we can check beforehand again what happened on our target system. So this is again T20. So let's make sure that the new entry TE has not yet arrived in our list. And as you can see, it's not in here. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to go to the latest commit. And this can be done by this button up here. So let's say update to latest commit. This takes now a second. In the background, everything is taken and imported into the ABAP system. So now our system was set to this latest commit. You can see it had become written in bold, and the other one is not bold anymore. So this is now the active commit. So let's go back again to our target system on the ABAP side. Let's check it. So let's check again on T20 what happened to the postal codes. So we go in this list again. And now we can see the entry TE for Taggart has arrived. So with this, you do now know how GCTS works and how you could transport somehow a customizing stuff via GCTS into a target system. You have additional options to check what had happened. So you could always click, for example, on the commit ID. This will bring up your GitHub, and there you can see what is inside the respective commit that you just clicked on. And in our case, you can see it's the country TE. So in here, you also have the options to check all the things that are on your repository. You can also see the branches. You can see all the commits in here. So this is all the same. Okay, so now you have seen all of the features or some of the new features that we provide in S/4HANA 2020. On this slide, you can again see the features that we have in the different releases. So what we started with in S/4HANA 1909 was to support the use case of distributed custom development. So that's what we have seen on the software lifecycle process slide in the beginning. In there, we can support workbench objects, and we think that we can support the process of continuous integration and automated deployment. In S/4HANA 2020, we made some enhancements for you so that you can also now use customizing transport requests with GCTS. So that's what you've just seen. We have a basic first idea or a merge UI that you can use for resolving conflicts. So it's not the full solution to support you for conflicts, for conflict resolution, but it's a first step. So the idea is that when you merge stuff, when you merge branches, you can find out where you have conflicts, and you will see the conflicts where they are inside your coding and so on. And then you can use this UI to either decide whether the local version or the remote version shall win, or whether you'd like to solve the conflicts. So that's the first version. We plan also some enhancement for that in the future. So that's the future direction that we go to be able to fully support the use cases of distributed development and maintenance in development in parallel. We need some more enhancement. We need to improve the merging functionality, so the conflict resolution functionality, and we need some additional stuff that helps you registering where your development comes from, so that you still know which system, if you use more than one development system, is the original of your ABAP coding. So where does it come from? Where shall it be developed? So not that everyone takes the coding, the latest commit into his system and then develops it, but that you really know who is responsible for it, where it's coming from, where shall it be developed. We also plan to enhance functionality or leverage functionality that's provided by GitHub so that you can use it for code reviews, so that you can, for example, work with pull requests to merge stuff that others developed, but on a 4, 6, whatever you need, I principle. We plan an additional or enhanced integration into the transport organizer so that you can work more with the GCTS specialties inside there. And we hope that we can improve in the future the exception handling and the logging. So when working with GCTS, you will already find a lot of hints and help and logs and so on, but there's always room for improvement, and we'll do our best to support you as good as we can in the exception handling and logging stuff so that it's much easier for you in the future to find out where something went wrong. Another thing that we plan for the future is the integration of the Git-enabled CTS in the change and request management charm of SAP Solution Manager. So this is ongoing development. It's not that it will need any S/4HANA future version, so higher than S/4HANA 2020, but it will require a special service pack of SAP Solution Manager. So before you have the charm integration, you would need to upgrade your SAP Solution Manager. And you will also get soon some information which SP is required before you can use that. In addition, we provide some more convenience functionalities so that you can more easily use GCTS for your business processes and on different CI platforms, Jenkins and other ones as well. Okay, so that's what I wanted to provide you as content of GCTS. What you can find on this slide are the related sessions that I recommend to you. So there's one about DevOps in general that gives you a more holistic overview on GCTS, on the other tools that we have for non-ABAP and all of this to complete your picture. There's also a session about change control management. So how does this CI/CD process work in hybrid landscapes? And we do also have an expert Q&A where you can ask questions and where you can find also more information. In addition, on this slide, you can find all of the links. You can find our community blogs on this. You can find where on the SAP support portal there's more. Most important maybe is the link on the SAP help portal where you can get details, what you need to configure, how does all of this work. So really the steps described in detail. What I would also recommend to you is this guided answer that helps you in case you are stuck somewhere. So it tries to take you from where you are. So it lists possible errors, and then you can go through it and hopefully find a solution for your problem. The last one is our central node. So that's something that you might really find helpful as we in there try to always collect all the new stuff that came up, all the new nodes, if we have some that need to be installed to fix something. Okay, so now I would like to recommend to you to continue a TechEd experience. I hope you enjoy it. And with this, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. If you have questions, feel free to email me, and then I will try my very best to answer your questions. Okay, thank you very much.